Still, I paid every month, on time, without fail. I worked long hours, skipped lunch, walked instead of driving, all to meet this arbitrary number they'd set for me. I never argued. I never raised my voice. I just watched how Melissa got her nails done every other week, how Jen planned a trip to Spain, how Robert bought a new sound system. All the while, I was eating canned soup in the corner room, like I was a renter in my own bloodline. The thing that broke me wasn't the money. It was what Robert said one night at dinner. We were all sitting around the table and Jen joked that I was basically a tenant with free babysitting duties. Everyone laughed. Then Robert added, "Yeah, well, at least he knows his place." I didn't say a word. I just smiled. But something inside me snapped quietly, like a cord being severed in a dark room. I cleaned my plate, thanked them for the meal, and excused myself. That night, I started my plan. I didn't scream. I didn't storm out. I didn't even hint that anything had changed. But it had. From that moment forward, I began walking through that house like a ghost with a goal. They thought they had control, but they had no idea that every dollar I handed over was a brick in the foundation of their own quiet undoing. What they didn't know was that over the past 2 years, I'd slowly rebuilt my savings. Every extra gig I could find, online blueprints, CAD design consults, remote structural evaluations, I took it. I was working late nights, using public Wi-Fi when I had to, skipping luxuries, living like I had nothing while I built everything. I had no social life, no weekend trips. I didn't even replace my phone when the screen cracked, but my bank account. It was getting stronger, quietly, just like me. Melissa and Jen kept treating the house like their personal playground. Melissa even made a joke about me being our live-in donor. They genuinely thought I needed them, that I had nowhere else to go. They mistook my silence for dependence, not realizing it was discipline. They mocked my old car, my quiet habits, my lack of nightlife. They didn't understand that some people don't show off because they're building something too sacred to be flaunted. What hurt the most wasn't even the mockery. It was how normal they made it seem. Like I was meant to be the family burden carrier. Like I owed them something for being born quieter, softer, less demanding. They mistook kindness for weakness. That's a dangerous mistake. I wasn't a fool. I was just patient. And patience, when rooted in self-respect, becomes the most dangerous form of power. I spent my nights researching the housing market. Not flashy homes, just something solid. A modest house outside the city, with clean lines, good bones, and most importantly, peace. I found it one rainy Tuesday morning. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with a small garden in the back, and a porch that caught the evening sun just right. I paid in full, cash. No mortgage, no cosigner, no debts. Just a key. And I didn't say a word to anyone. I picked up the keys on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The realtor looked surprised when I handed her a cashier's check for the full amount. "No financing?" she asked. I smiled. "Nope, just peace of mind." I didn't tell her that every cent of that money had come from the same people who called me the family tenant. I didn't tell her that every joke at my expense had become a brick in the quiet fortress I now owned. I just took the keys, walked through the empty rooms of my new house, and for the first time in years, breathed like I was actually alive. For the next few weeks, I continued as if nothing had changed. I still handed Robert the envelope with $1,200 cash on the 1st of the month. I still ate quietly at the same kitchen table. I still let Melissa borrow my charger and Jen steal my cereal. I was still invisible to them. But now it didn't hurt. Now I was playing a game they didn't even know had begun. I was no longer trying to prove I deserved kindness. I was simply watching how deeply entitlement can rot people from the inside out. I started moving things out little by little, one book at a time, a pair of shoes, my engineering blueprints. I kept a spare duffel bag in my car and filled it every morning when I left for work. Nobody noticed. They were too busy planning brunches and taking selfies in the living room. I was paying to keep warm. Robert didn't notice I had stopped watching TV with them. Melissa didn't question why my closet looked emptier, and Jen certainly didn't ask why I had stopped talking altogether. I had become a ghost, and ghosts don't owe anyone explanations. Then came the final step. I requested 2 weeks off work and used the time to furnish my new house. Everything was second-hand, but carefully chosen. Clean lines, warm colors, quiet beauty, the kind of home where you could hear your own thoughts. No footsteps pounding upstairs, no passive-aggressive comments echoing through the halls, just silence, peace, ownership. Every time I walked through the door, it felt like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I didn't even know I had lost. The night before I left for good, I stood in that guest room one last time. The same room where I had cried in silence, skipped meals, and questioned my worth. I looked around and realized there was nothing left to pack. I had already taken everything of value, my dignity, my self-respect, my future, everything else. Those walls, that bed, that false sense of family, they could keep. I left one last envelope on the desk, but this time it didn't hold $1,200. It held a note. The note read, "Thank you for reminding me who I am." Nothing more. No explanation, no anger, no confrontation. I walked out before sunrise, quiet, steady, unbothered. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The real door had closed long ago. This was just the sound of peace locking into place. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone. Not a single call, text, or social media update. Silence became my ally, and that silence unsettled them more than any confrontation ever could. Within 3 days, I started receiving messages, first from Jen, then Melissa, finally Robert. At first it was confusion. "Hey, you forgot your charger? You coming back later?" Then came the tone shift. "Are you okay? You left without saying anything." And then the real questions. "Where are you staying? Did something happen?" I left every message on read. A week passed, and my quiet life began to bloom. I made coffee in my own kitchen, sat on my own porch, slept in my own bed, where no one rolled their eyes at my lights-out schedule. I started doing things for me again, things I'd put off for years, reading before bed, sketching design ideas, just for fun. I even began writing a journal, documenting this entire process. Not out of spite, but so I'd never forget what it meant to reclaim your life, inch by inch. That's when the tone of their messages changed again. Panic, then anger. Robert sent a voice note laced with faux concern and veiled bitterness. "You know, if you were going through something, you could have talked to us. But just disappearing like that. It's kind of dramatic, man." Melissa followed with a snide text. "Wow. So I guess you're too good for us now." Jen was more direct. "Where are you staying and how are you paying for it?" I didn't respond. Their anger wasn't about me leaving, it was about me not needing them anymore. Then came the breaking point. Robert showed up at my workplace. I was in the middle of reviewing blueprints when the receptionist buzzed me. "There's a Robert West here to see you. Says he's your cousin." I sighed. He was waiting in the lobby, pacing. When he saw me, he tried to smile. "Hey man, we were just worried." I shook his hand and said nothing. He kept talking. "We just don't understand what happened. One day you're with us, the next, you're gone." I nodded slowly, letting the silence hang. Then I said, "I realized I wasn't home." That silence hit him harder than any accusation. He tried to laugh it off. "So, you bought your own place or something?" His voice was casual, but his eyes weren't. I didn't confirm or deny. I just said, "I'm good, Robert. Better than I've been in years." He stood there, fidgeting. "Well, you could have just told us." I smiled gently. "I did, just not with words." Then I walked away, not in anger, in completion. That moment was when I realized they never expected me to grow wings. They only expected me to shrink to fit the mold they built for me. But when you quietly rebuild yourself, when you no longer need their approval or permission, you become something they can't recognize, free. It wasn't long after that awkward office visit that the backlash began. Melissa posted a cryptic message online. "Some people forget who helped them when they had nothing." Jen followed with something sharper. "Funny how the quiet ones end up being the coldest." I read their words with the same detachment I used to read building codes. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. That was the old version of me. The man who explained his choices to people who never cared about the cost of them. This new chapter didn't need explanations. It only required silence and action. Robert, however, didn't take the silence well. He began messaging mutual family members, spinning a version of the story where I had betrayed them. He told people I ran off, left them high and dry, disrespected the family. But truth has a way of revealing itself over time, especially when the only story you tell is the one you live out quietly. I didn't need to say anything. Those who truly knew me began to ask the right questions. Why was he paying that much rent? Why didn't the others contribute? Why didn't they support him the way he supported them? Within weeks, their reputation began to crack. A cousin called me out of the blue. "Dan, I just want to say, I didn't know what they were doing. If I had known, I would have spoken up." I thanked her, but I wasn't bitter. I had no appetite for vengeance. What I wanted, I already had. Peace, ownership, self-respect. You don't seek revenge when you're living better than the people who wronged you. You just keep building brick by brick until their noise can't touch the walls you've raised. Meanwhile, I kept pouring into the life I had built. I planted a small lemon tree in the backyard, something my mother always wanted before she passed. I spent weekends working on the house, learning how to fix small things with my hands. I hosted no parties, shared no photos online, made no grand announcements. But every light bulb I installed, every drawer I organized, every night I slept without dread. Those were my victories, and they were mine alone. One evening I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a note written in Melissa's handwriting. It said, "We didn't realize how much you did for us until you were gone. Things haven't been the same. Jen's thinking of moving out. Robert's stressed all the time. I'm sorry, I guess we took you for granted." I read the letter once, folded it gently, and placed it in the back of my drawer. Not out of sentiment, but as a reminder that sometimes the apology comes too late to change anything, but just in time to confirm everything. I never wrote back. I didn't need to. That house, that note, their unraveling, that was the conversation. Not with rage, not with bitterness, just clarity. And when clarity finally arrives, it speaks louder than any argument ever could. I began to understand that walking away wasn't just a decision, it was a practice. Every day I woke up in my own home, I was reminded of the quiet power of choosing myself. I didn't need to cut anyone off dramatically. I just had to keep showing up for the version of me that used to be ignored in that crowded house. The one who never raised his voice, never made a scene, never demanded fairness. That man was now living a life that required no permission to exist. The silence that used to suffocate me now held me like a soft blanket. My mornings were slow and intentional. I read the paper, took walks, cooked simple meals. I remembered what it felt like to be human, Not just useful. There were no guilt trips, no expectations, no sly comments hiding behind smiles. The house was quiet, but my soul was loud with healing. I was no longer the man they thought they could mold. I was something much harder to exploit, self-made. And still, they tried to get in. Jen showed up one afternoon, unannounced, standing outside my gate like she'd just remembered I existed. I watched from the kitchen window for a few minutes before stepping outside. "Hey," she said, shifting from one foot to the other. "We've been worried." I didn't invite her in. I didn't ask why she came. I simply said, "I'm okay." She glanced past me at the porch furniture, the plants I'd arranged, the wind chimes swaying gently above the door. Her eyes held a flicker of something unfamiliar, respect. She hesitated, then said, "I guess I didn't realize how much we leaned on you. Not just for rent, but for stability." I let the silence sit between us, like a wall we both knew wasn't going to come down. "You didn't lean," I finally replied. "You stood on me." Her face fell, but I wasn't cruel. I wasn't cold. I was just done pretending. "This place," I said, gesturing behind me, "wasn't built out of spite. It was built from what I survived." She nodded slowly, the weight of her choices settling into her shoulders for the first time. She left without asking to come inside, and I went back to my tea, the breeze through the screen door reminding me that peace doesn't beg to be recognized, it just exists. A few weeks after Jen's visit, Robert called. I let it ring the first time, and the second, but on the third, I answered, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. His voice was quieter than I remembered, less sure of itself.
Dan.
"I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he began. "I handled things wrong. I let the money get in the way of being a decent human being." I stayed silent. He continued, "You were always dependable, always respectful. I took advantage of that." We all did. The apology felt late, but not dishonest. I could hear the weight in his voice, the unraveling of the story he had told himself, that I needed them. He now knew I never did. Still, I didn't jump to make him feel better. Letting people sit in their regret is sometimes the most respectful thing you can do for them and for yourself. "I accept the apology," I said after a pause, "but that doesn't mean I'll return to that version of us." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "I get it. I really do." After that, things grew quieter, not just in my world, but in theirs. No more messages, no more sudden visits, no cryptic posts online. Just distance, the natural consequence of truth. I knew they were dealing with their own fallout. When you remove the person who holds everything together, everything else eventually falls apart. But I didn't celebrate their unraveling. I had no interest in watching them suffer. My story wasn't about their downfall. It was about my return to self. One evening I stood in my small garden trimming the lemon tree. A neighbor walked by and waved. "Beautiful evening," she called. I nodded, smiling. She didn't know my story. She didn't know the war I'd walked through to enjoy something as simple as trimming a tree at dusk, and she didn't need to. Not all victories need an audience. Some are meant to be savored in the stillness of a life you built with your own two hands. That night I wrote in my journal, "Forgiveness is not about letting someone back in. It's about setting yourself free from the need to be seen by the ones who refuse to see you." I closed the journal gently, knowing I had finally stepped into a life where my value wasn't determined by how useful I was to someone else. My worth wasn't for rent anymore. It was rooted now in soil I owned, in silence I chose, and in a future I would never again negotiate. The more time passed, the more I realized how deeply I had been conditioned to believe that love must be earned through sacrifice. Living in that house, I had absorbed the message that to belong, I had to pay for my place. Not just with money, but with silence, with endurance, with self-denial. But now, in the quiet of my own home, I began to reprogram that belief. I started choosing relationships where love came without a price tag, where presence wasn't transactional, and where I didn't have to disappear to be accepted. I reconnected with old friends, ones who had reached out in the past, only for me to push them away, embarrassed by how little I thought I had to offer. But now I showed up differently, not as someone seeking approval, but as someone whole. I hosted simple dinners, nothing extravagant, just home-cooked meals, laughter, stories that didn't revolve around survival. And people came. They came not because I had something to prove, but because I had something to share. Peace. Eventually, even family members outside that house began reaching out. A cousin I hadn't seen in years messaged me. I heard what happened, just wanted to say, I respect how you handled everything. Quiet dignity. That phrase stuck with me. Quiet dignity. It wasn't flashy, it didn't demand attention, but it held weight. And that was the legacy I was building now. Not one built on bitterness or revenge, but on silent integrity and steady self-worth. I began volunteering at a local mentorship program for young adults entering the trades. Most of them came from tough backgrounds, broken homes, financial strain, emotional neglect. I saw fragments of myself in every one of them, and when I shared pieces of my story, I didn't dwell on the betrayal, I focused on the rebuilding. Sometimes I told them, you won't get the apology. Sometimes the justice you're looking for won't come from them. It'll come from the life you build after they're gone. Late one night, I sat on my porch, watching the moon drift behind clouds. I thought about my father. What would he say if he saw the man I had become? I imagined him saying something simple. Took you long enough to see your own worth. And I smiled, not with regret, but with gratitude. Some lessons take time to bloom, especially the ones that teach us how to walk away without burning bridges, only closing the gates and tending to our own garden. In the distance, I could hear wind chimes, soft, clear, honest, the kind of sound that never begs to be heard, but always gets noticed by those who are still enough to listen. That's who I was now, a man who no longer shouted for his place in the world, because he had built it with his own two hands. That realization was the final thread, snapping, the idea that protecting myself could be seen as betrayal, when in reality it was the first act of self-honesty. I stopped responding out of habit. I stopped explaining myself, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to exist without justification. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need them to agree. All I needed was to no longer abandon myself just to be accepted. I came across a photo one day, an old family picture from a holiday dinner. I saw myself at the far edge of the frame, half smiling, barely noticed that image used to sting. But now I looked at it with compassion, not pity. That version of me didn't know yet what he was capable of. One Sunday morning, I took a walk through a nearby park. Kids were playing. An old couple sat on a bench, holding hands. A father chased his daughter through fallen leaves. I stopped and took it all in. I didn't feel behind anymore. I didn't feel like I had to catch up to anyone. I was exactly where I needed to be. That realization didn't arrive with fireworks. It came like breath, like peace, like truth finally settling into the bones. I had never imagined that peace could feel so unfamiliar at first. There was a strange guilt in enjoying life without needing to apologize for it. But eventually, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sometimes people from the old life would reach out, not out of love, but out of curiosity. So, what are you doing these days? Heard you bought a house. I'd respond with a polite, I'm doing well, thanks. Nothing more. I didn't owe them details. The version of me they thought they knew no longer existed, and I had no intention of handing them a map to find the new one. My house became more than a shelter. It became a mirror. It reflected back everything I had hidden from myself for years. The art I put on the walls, the books I returned to, the plants I learned to nurture, all of it reminded me I was no longer surviving. I was living, and every corner of that home whispered the same message. You earned this. One evening I sat outside, watching the sky turn that deep indigo right before night falls. I realized I hadn't cried in months. Not because I was holding back, but because I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt whole. Not perfect, not unscarred, but whole. The kind of wholeness that comes after rebuilding yourself brick by brick, without asking anyone to hand you the blueprint. I started mentoring a younger engineer at work. He was going through family issues, different story, same wounds. One day he asked, "How did you know when it was time to walk away?" I looked at him and said, "When staying started to feel like self-betrayal." He nodded slowly, and I could tell he understood. That's how healing spreads. Not through sermons, but through scars turned into maps for someone else. The irony is that the people who once dismissed me now speak of me with reverence. He's so independent, always calm, always composed. They don't realize that the version they respect now was born out of the version they ignored. But I don't need them to see it. I've seen it for myself, and that's enough. It's strange how life circles back in the quietest ways. The same house I left behind, where I once felt like a stranger with a rent receipt, has now become just a distant memory. I pass by it sometimes on the way to the store, or during a weekend drive, and I don't feel anger, I don't feel sadness. I feel distance, as if it belonged to a different lifetime, to a man who no longer walks these roads. There's a deep kind of redemption that doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from becoming someone who no longer waits for validation, who no longer proves his worth through suffering, who no longer lets guilt masquerade as love. I became that someone. Not in one great leap, but in 1,000 silent decisions no one else saw. And that's why it's real. Because I built it when no one was watching. Now, I look at my life and see richness everywhere. In the quiet of morning light through my windows, in the sound of my own laugh echoing in a space I no longer share with judgment, in the meals I cook for myself without criticism, in the deep sleep that comes when no one expects you to carry more than your share. That richness doesn't have a price tag, but it cost everything to earn. Robert reached out one last time a few months ago. He said the house was being sold. Things had fallen apart. Melissa had moved back in with a friend. Jen was thinking about relocating. It's been rough, he admitted. I told him I hoped he found peace, not as a dig, as truth. Because peace isn't something you steal from others. It's something you build, one honest decision at a time. Sometimes I still think of that guest room, that cold space with thin walls and expectations that pressed in like smoke, but only for a moment. Then I return to the present, to my own porch, my own keys, my own life. I'm not haunted by what happened anymore. I'm held by what I chose to create from it. And if that's not victory, I don't know what is. So, if you're listening, if you're someone who has ever been used, underestimated, or made to feel small, I hope you remember this. You don't have to scream to reclaim your power. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is leave quietly, build relentlessly, and never look back. Because real strength isn't loud, it's sovereign. And if you've made it this far, drop a review in the comments.